I'm Danny. I'm one of Dr. McMillan's grad students and wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about wetland biogeochemistry. So as you probably know, wetlands are great for sequestering carbon. Their inundated or highly saturated conditions slow the decomposition process. So compared to more terrestrial soils, wetlands tend to have a lot of barely decomposed organic matter. Here you can kind of see some of the roots and a little bit of less decomposed organic matter. We'd call this not sapric, but humic or humic material, because it is a bit decomposed, but some of the organic matter you can still see is derived from plants. And in terrestrial soils, we would maybe see this top layer of organic matter, but it would be a lot more decomposed. And so with these conditions, there's a lot of organic matter in wetlands that's stored that is not quite broken down, which influences the biogeochemistry of the system.
Right, so like we've talked about in class, all of the respiration that happens in a wetland has to have a carbon source as their primary source of energy. And in wetlands, that is the degraded or the partially decomposed plant material. So microbes, right, they can't use anything that's particulate. It has to be dissolved for them to be able to use it. So a lot of other organisms are here, physical processes as well as other kind of shredders and insects can start to kind of break this material down. Once it gets into this organic state is when microbes are ready to use that carbon. So on the surface, remember, we have oxygen getting into the surface soils. And in the cases of this really inundated, very wet all the time, the likelihood of any oxygen actually being at the soil surface is pretty small. And if it is, it's on the order of millimeters, right? As you move up the gradient from the wet up into the more terrestrial part of the wetland, you can see that we're actually able to probably have some more surface oxygen. And in those cases, oxygen, aerobic respiration is happening at the surface. As you move down, the next step in the redox ladder is denitrification. And so in those cases, remember the nitrogen cycle and all of its complexities. Well, denitrification is the one where microbes who are consuming that organic matter as their food source and their carbon source are using nitrate as their electron acceptor. And so that is likely happening very, very quickly, and I would say at a relatively robust rate in the sediments, because if you look across the Celery Bog, you will see the golf course, and we're surrounded by the suburban parts of West Lafayette. So there are a lot of inputs of nitrogen from things like fertilizers on lawns. This is probably likely happening at the golf course in higher rates, just a guess, and just generally from runoff from the neighborhoods and around here. So higher nitrogen concentrations in this wetland than you might see in one in a natural system. So that makes the supply of nitrate higher, and then they can actually do that denitrification process faster. As you move down the redox ladder, we get into iron and manganese reduction. Not a lot of those two chemicals or elements, in this wetland. But then as we move down even further, the next one is sulfate reduction, and then down to methanogenesis. So what we really are interested in wetlands like this is that balance between carbon decomposition, nitrate removal, that denitrification is a good thing, and then that methane production through methanogenesis, because now that's a greenhouse gas that's emitting. And so you can sometimes see almost little bubbles emerge from these kind of quiescent pools because of all the methane gas that's being generated under the soil surface, where that carbon is slowly decomposing.
Major ecosystem service of wetlands, while also mitigating the release of methane and other greenhouse gases. If you think back to the nitrogen cycle, it is a stepwise process. So in the last step, you have nitrous oxide production, and then eventually, if you have complete denitrification, you end up with nitrogen gas. And that nitrous oxide is a potent greenhouse gas. Wetlands are the second largest natural source of nitrous oxide in the world, at least taking out all the anthropogenic sources of it. And then wetlands are the largest natural source of methane. Although there are, again, anthropogenic sources that are much larger than the pool from wetlands. So we're trying to ask questions like, how can we maybe use plants to change the quality of the carbon to balance these cycles? And other questions like, how could we manage the water table in these systems to prevent the redox conditions from going so low that we are having a lot of methane production? So there are lots of complexities that are still yet to be figured out in balancing the benefits of wetlands for treating nitrate and for sequestering carbon versus the offset of greenhouse gas emissions from these systems.
Yeah, I will just, don't stop it just yet. I want to add one more bit. If you can tell a little bit from where we're standing, it is winter still, the plants aren't emerging quite yet, but you can tell from the standing bed that there are multiple types of plant communities here. There are native plants, there are invasive plants, and there are trees, both large trees as well as small kind of more wetland-like water-loving tree species. So that carbon from all of those different kinds of plant communities is different. And that's what we're thinking might be really important driver of some of these changes in this redox chemistry. So a little beyond what we do as scientists, but it's really important to what you might do as a restoration engineer. Because as an engineer, when you're designing a wetland restoration or a new construction of a wetland, you can pick which plants you should be putting into your system. And so that's a really great way for restoration to kind of build into these questions around trade-offs in water quality, greenhouse gases, etc. All right,